Hey guys, let's review the reproductive system real quick. So remember that when we talk about reproductive organs, we're talking about the testis and the ovary. Okay, those are the ones that actually make the gametes, the eggs and the sperm. These also make sex hormones, estrogen and testosterone. Okay, so estrogen's coming from the ovaries, testosterone's coming from the testis. We actually both sexes make both of these. In the case of the female, you make way more estrogen. You do make testosterone. It just comes from your adrenal glands, which hang out above the kidneys. In the male, it's the fat cells that make estrogen. There's some other ones too, but we don't really care. Everything else going on in the reproductive system has to do with the delivery of those gametes or the maturation of a growing fetus. Okay, so let's move on. Let's start with the female reproductive system because it's the more complicated one. It's more complicated because females have okay, yeah, this is a bit cis normative, which is problematic, but we're just going to go with it for now. A female reproductive system has is under the control of cyclic production of hormones at variable levels, and this results in a cyclic production of gametes. Those eggs are coming and going based on what time of the what timing in the menstrual cycle you're in. It has a lot of reasons that we'll go into in a few minutes, okay? But let's look at the anatomy and the physiology first. So the uterus is this big muscular organ here, and its whole function is supporting the growth of a baby, okay? The ovaries are those reproductive organs. They are developing eggs, and they are producing estrogen and testosterone, okay? So if you go from the ovary, you are moving into the fallopian tubes or the uterine tubes. And these have these little ends called fimbriae, which are there to kind of grab the egg as it's shot out of the ovary. And then there's cilia that line the fallopian tube that help move the egg from the end of the fallopian tube and then into the uterus, okay? Before it gets to the uterus, if there's sperm present, fertilization happens within the uterus or within the fallopian tube itself, okay? It takes about 72 hours, that you have about 72 hours of prime fertilization time. In theory, well, it just goes as you could technically get fertilized within the uterus, but it's much less likely because the sperm are really diluted throughout the entire uterus, whereas here they get filtered and kind of concentrated, okay? Instead of implanting in the uterus, a fertilized egg implants in the fallopian tube, you get what's called an ectopic pregnancy, and those are incredibly dangerous because as the fetus is developing, it's starting to grow vasculature, so arteries and veins, which start pulling blood from the mother's system, and it creates a placenta, and it eventually bursts from the fallopian tube. Those vasculature then bleed out into the mother, and then the mother bleeds out. Okay, so an ectopic pregnancy is very dangerous. Okay, let's keep going. Here we have the ovary, the fallopian tube, the uterus. The uterus, at the very end of the uterus, we have the cervix. It's the part of the uterus that sticks out into the vagina. The cervix is just kind of the gateway to the uterus. It protrudes. It has a very tightly regulated opening that has a mucus plug in it, and depending on what time of hormonal production you're in, the mucus plug will either allow sperm in or it will deny sperm access, okay? So you don't want to let sperm into the uterus while there's already a growing fetus or the potential for a growing fetus, but you do want to let sperm in when it's time to, when you're ovulating and you want to get fertilized, okay? The vaginal canal or the vagina is just for the deposit of sperm and for sexual pleasure, and it is also for delivering a baby. So it's called a baby. Well, there's a cartoon I read that calls it a baby hallway, which is pretty funny. In a C-section, you avoid the vagina altogether during delivery, and you actually cut straight into the uterus to take out the baby, to deliver the baby. Oh, we're going to skip over this a bit. Let's keep going through the uterus. So if we look into the uterus, it actually has two layers. It has the endometrium, which is what is shed during a period. Okay, so that is the layer that has a lot of blood and a lot of nutrients, and it is it can grow and develop and help feed a baby, and it helps create part of the placenta. The myometrium is the muscular layer underneath it, which during when you are shedding that endometrium, it contracts and pushes that endometrium out. When you are giving birth, it has huge contractions, which help push the baby out completely or expel the fetus. Okay, so myo means muscular. That's how you can remember the myometrium is the thick muscular layer. The endometrium is that lining that has a lot of nutrients and blood vessels to feed a growing fetus. If you look at the external genitalia, we have the clitoris, which is homologous to the head of the penis, the glans penis. It is a very highly innervated section of nerves. It's a very little nerve bundle that helps with, it's used for orgasms and social bonding in humans, okay? Under the influence of testosterone, it starts to look more and more like a penis, and so that's what happens in female bodybuilders and in animals where you have a very female-dominated organism, or female-dominated society, such as the hyenas. Okay, you will notice that the urethral opening is completely separate from the vagina in the female. These tubes never overlap. However, because they are so close together during any kind of sexual activity, the vaginal fluids or any fluids could end up going into the urethra, so that's why it's very important to urinate after any kind of sexual activities, or you could get a UTI or urinary tract infection. You can also just get a urinary tract infection for any reason, for many reasons, because the urethra is so short in females. It gets to the bladder very easily. Then we have the vagina, which is often covered by a hymen, which is just this film that is there after birth, and has a lot of social constructs that we're not going to worry about. And you'll notice that there are two folds of skin. Okay, so we have the labia majora and then the labia minora, which just help protect the vaginal area. If we go back and think about the ovaries, what the ovaries are doing is they are full of all the eggs a female will ever have in her entire life. These actually develop inside the, let's think about this. We'll just keep going. So these are present before a female fetus is even born. Okay, so you'll have the maximum number of eggs you'll ever have before you're even born. They're just not functional. Once you hit puberty, you're down to about 1 million of them, okay, or maybe 200,000 of them. That's fine. You don't need 200,000 eggs, obviously. And they just kind of are sitting after meiosis, or like mid-meiosis in metaphase 2, just waiting for the signal to finish developing. Because you don't want them to be fully developed. You want to be able to develop them as you need them, so that you don't, if something weird happens, you basically are keeping your eggs fresher is kind of a way to think of it. So you make eggs through something called oogenesis, which is a form of gametogenesis. Gametogenesis means making of gametes. Oogenesis means you're making oocytes, which is the egg. Okay. So notice that we, as females, you have a set number of gametes at birth, and then those numbers just go down as you get older. So what's happening here? So if this is an ovary and we're looking at it over time, we have a follicle, which is the cells associated with a growing egg or ova. And as soon as they get the signal, the follicle stimulating hormone from the brain, they start maturing, and the follicle gets bigger, and it allows the egg to mature, and then it builds up this big fluid sac behind it. And then as soon as it gets one more signal, the luteinizing hormone signal, the follicle ruptures. That fluid pushes that egg out in ovulation, which is this very forceful act. The egg has to get across the open space between the ovary and the fallopian tube, so it needs kind of a push behind it. The best way to think of it is like thinking of popping a zit. Super great. Okay, and then that egg goes flying, gets picked up by the fallopian tube, and then goes down to try and meet some sperm. Okay, but there's still cells left over afterwards. Those cells, that empty follicle, is called the corpus luteum. It starts producing progesterone to tell the uterus to start making the endometrial lining, okay? So as soon as ovulation occurs, you start to build up your endometrium, because as far as your body's concerned, this is it. This is the time you're getting pregnant. It's so exciting. Every single month, okay? Because it's better to be wasting energy because you didn't get pregnant than to have to say, oh, oops, we should have gotten pregnant, but we weren't ready. So evolution favored this model. Okay. After 2 weeks, though, the corpus luteum dies, and if there is no growing fetus, then progesterone goes away, because the placenta of the fetus will start creating progesterone also to maintain the endometrial lining. So without the corpus luteum and without a growing fetus, there's no hormone to maintain the endometrial lining, and it gets shed in the menstrual cycle or the period. That's kind of what this is saying. The corpus luteum makes progesterone. Progesterone says, hey, no more FSH. We don't need to make any more eggs. Give us 2 weeks to find out if we're going to get pregnant or not. So without FSH, you don't develop any more eggs. Without any more eggs, you don't develop any more estrogen. And so the birth control pill is often very highly progesterone because it blocks the production of any more estrogens. And so you aren't making new eggs, so you're not ovulating. Okay, let's keep going. So this is what ovulation looks like. Okay, so this is the ovary, this is a follicle that's being developed, and this is the egg coming out. There we go. All right, so let's keep going. So what does progesterone do? Progesterone prepares the endometrium for implantation. So it's building up that endometrial layer just in case a fetus is starting to grow. It also causes breast enlargement in case you're going to start lactating. It causes the increase in temperature by about a degree, and it makes sure no more eggs are being ovulated. On the other hand, estrogens, which are being secreted as this egg is being developed, the first thing they do is during puberty, when you first start developing these eggs, they start to develop your female sexual organs, okay, and it changes the fat deposition, so you start to grow breasts, hips, and thighs in a female pattern. You start to get hair in places, and we didn't go into what that's about, but that's okay. And it causes you to stop growing in your long bones because it unites your epiphyseal discs, and that's something that actually happens in males and females. So you have a growth spurt right before this, and then that disc fuses, and then it's you're done growing. You'll grow in your spine, but not in your long bones. So what happens when you're pregnant? If you're pregnant, what are you doing? So the corpus luteum creates progesterone, you get that thickened endometrium, but again, the corpus luteum is going to die after 2 weeks unless HCG, which is created by the fusion of egg and sperm, or that fertilization process, human chorionic gonadotropin, will go and support the corpus luteum until the placenta is done developing. As soon as the placenta is done developing, it starts to create progesterone, which makes sure you're not making any more eggs until after birth. Okay, that's the pregnancy test hormone. This is what your pregnancy test is testing for. If you have you will always have progesterone progesterone present or estrogen present. So that's not something you can test for during a pregnancy test to get a good result of if you're pregnant or not. But HCG is only created in the presence of a fertilized egg, so that's a good test for pregnancy. We aren't going to go into that. What is fertilization? Fertilization is when sperm enters the egg, and you only want one to do this, okay? This happens in the fallopian tube. Sperm only live about 48 hours, while a ovum is only really fertile for about 24 hours. When you're young, though, there's a huge overlap. So don't just be like, well, obviously I just ovulated, so I can have sex in 2 days. No, that you don't. You're actually releasing more than one egg at a time, and so your ovulation window is much, much bigger. Okay, that's why it gets harder to get. One of the many reasons it's harder to get pregnant as you get older is you release less eggs each time, and so then that fertilization window is much smaller. Okay, let's talk about homology. So all fetuses, we'll come back for this in a second. Okay, so let's talk about this again. So in a growing fetus, in the reproductive system, you start out as this undifferentiated system of gonads. They're not gonads yet, they're pre-gonadal, and then these two systems of tubes, and then this outer tube that's going to, whatever, we'll get to it. In the presence of the activation of the SRY, or the sex-determining region of the Y chromosome, you start to go towards the male system, and in the presence of the double X chromosomes in a female, you go towards the female system, okay? So in that case, the undifferentiated gonad becomes a testis in the male and an ovary in the female, so they're homologous, they're coming from the same place, but doing different things. The glans penis becomes the clitoris, what is undifferentiated either becomes the glans penis or the clitoris. There is there's this tissue that is either going to become the exterior skin of the penis shaft or the labia minora. There's more tissue that either becomes the scrotum or the labia majora, and then the foreskin and the clitoral hood are also homologous. Everything else is completely different and not connected. So you'll notice this black tube is what becomes the vas deferens. The white tube is what becomes the uterus and the fallopian tubes, the entire thing. So there's a lot of differentiation coming on. But you'll notice that the way evolution works is we're going to take one thing and do stuff to it because that's easier than creating two completely completely different things from nothing. It's a lot easier to start with one thing and modify it than have to start from scratch each time. So interesting homologies there. Let's move on from the male system, the female system to the male system. And so this is a side view of the male reproductive system. Someone asked, what's the anus doing here? It's just close by. Same reason that the bladder is in here. It's not, the anus and the bladder are not involved in creating babies, but they are closely, they are just close to the reproductive system, okay? Okay, so remember, males have a continuous production of hormones at constant levels. So this can vary daily, but pretty much testosterone is a constant level. FSH, LH are constant levels in males, unlike in the females where you have a cycling of LH, of FSH, then LH, of estrogen, then progesterone, depending on where you are in the cycle, okay? So because of this constant production of hormones at constant levels, you get a constant production of sperm, okay? Let's talk about some organs. The scrotum is what holds the testis, and it keeps the testis 3 degrees cooler than the rest of the body, or else spermatogenesis, or the creation of sperm, doesn't go well. Because this is happening continuously, you want to do what you can to make sure that sperm is not being disrupted in its production, okay? So the scrotum is, because it has to keep everything 3 degrees cooler, if it's really hot, the scrotum is very elastic, and it can actually move the testis, allow the testis to be moved farther away from the body by allowing it to stretch. If it's really cold, it can allow the testis to be closer to the body by contracting and bringing it closer, okay, by getting shrinkage. The testis itself is the male gonad. The testis is, so testis, I think, is plural. Testes is plural. Testis is singular. Either one is fine. These are the male gonads. They produce sperm and testosterone, just like in the female. The ovary produces eggs and estrogen and progesterone. Okay, let's look at a sperm. So a sperm is a single cell that has a flagella. Okay, so the flagella is the tail that allows it to move. Okay, and that's very important. It needs to go to where the egg is. It follows a chemical signal, basically like smelling, okay? It's like when we see something and we're like, I'm going to go to that thing, and we go there. We use that sense in this case, or like if a dog smells, a bloodhound smells something and it's going to go follow the trail. Same thing is happening when the acrosome, well, no, that's something else happening here. Basically, the sperm can smell where the egg is and goes in that direction, okay? Smell is kind of a complicated thing. The testosterone is produced in the, okay, so sperm are produced in the epididymis, in the seminiferous, they're actually produced in the testis. I don't know why that's in the testis, and they mature in epididymis, and we'll talk about that. Epididymis. I don't know if that's spelled right. Probably not. There we go. Okay. So there's these cells that produce sperm. In between those cells are cells that produce testosterone. The sperm itself has the nucleus in the head. It has a midpiece that's just full of mitochondria, and all that mitochondria does is power that tail, powers that flagella. At the head of the nucleus, you have the acrosome, which is there's basically this protein cap, and one of the things in that protein cap is a hydrolytic enzyme, which breaks down, if you go back over here, whichever sperm is, what these sperms are doing is the acrosome, those enzymes are breaking down the outer chunky layer of the cell. Basically, it's kind of like a shell, but not really, and it's allowing sperm, species-specific sperm, to get in and actually fertilize the egg, okay? So, yeah, that's the 4 parts. Okay, so what is spermatogenesis? That's a creation of sperm. If you look inside the testis, inside what are called the seminiferous tubules, of which there are 1,500 feet, so much surface area for the creation of sperm. You look inside each tube, you have this open part where these sperm tails all hang in. So they start up here at these progenitor cells. They go through meiosis and then start traveling towards this part. When the tail is grown, they then get swept into this lumen and then get taken to the epididymis to finish being matured, okay? They mature in the epididymis. They, and they mature in the presence of testosterone. That's all you really need to know. Okay, so you are a sperm. How do you leave the body? You have to go through the seminiferous tubules of the testis, and then the epididymis, okay? Then you have to go through the vas deferens. The vas deferens then goes through the ejaculatory duct and enters the the urethra. You then have to go through the urethra and then out the penis in order to leave the body. Okay, lots of tubes. Moving on. And by the way, this is the bladder. It's not involved. It's just, that's where it is, okay? So there's other stuff involved. You don't just release semen, or sorry, you don't just release sperm, you release semen. And semen is a combination of sperm and seminal fluids. It was called seminal fluids because people used to think that was all the seminal vesicles' fault, or like, not fault, but like the only other stuff in semen was coming from the seminal vesicles. Well, it turns out there's the bulbourethral gland and the prostate gland, which are also adding fluids to what's happening with the sperm. So you get this mix of sperm and a lot of different fluids. You need these fluids because you need to make seminal fluid is basic in nature because it has to counteract the acidity of urine coming from the bladder, because remember, the bladder releases urine into the urethra, which then leads to the penis. Well, you don't want your sperm to be bathing in that very acidic urine, so one of the secretions from one of these glands is a basic solution which causes which neutralizes that acid. That's part of what pre-ejaculatory fluid is, kind of paving the way for you. It's also important because the vaginal canal is incredibly acidic to kill bacteria. So the sperm don't want to get killed by, just like there's some simple bacteria, so that you want to neutralize the vaginal area as well, okay? There's also fructose in seminal fluid because you need to be able to power that mitochondria that we talked about when we're talking about the mid piece being full of mitochondria to power the tail. Well, if you've been, if it takes so many weeks for sperm to be created, you don't want to run out of food as soon as you enter vagina, so you need to be able to bathe in that sugar to get kind of a boost when you're swimming through the female reproductive system, if you make it that far. The prostate creates prostaglandins, which are a hormone that causes muscular contraction, very localized muscular contraction. Those muscular contractions are what cause your myometrium to contract in order to either push out a baby or to get rid of the endometrial lining, and that's part of what causes cramping. Well, if you're a sperm and you're going to be traveling up the female system, you're moving upstream, right? You're moving against the current, so you want to create your own little set of contractions that help push the sperm up that stream and rather than down it. So the sperm come with their own prostaglandins to help propel them up the female reproductive system. There's also lubricant to make sure sperm doesn't get stuck in all of these tubes. Okay, all right. Here's the external male genitalia, a bit less complicated than females. Here's the scrotum. You can tell where the scrotum has come together, where it would otherwise be, if in the female, it's labia majora. Okay. You also can see, so in an uncircumcised male, you have the foreskin. In a circumcised male, you don't. That's it. All right, let's move on. So this is the penis. Obviously, this is the scrotum. Let's talk about those male hormones. So male hormones are very similar to female hormones. They just do different things, okay? So follicle stimulating hormone, the exact same hormone. It's produced in the same place. It does basically the same thing. In females, follicle stimulating hormone causes eggs to mature. In males, it causes sperm to mature. It stimulates spermatogenesis. In the luteinizing hormone is also, these two, the other thing is in females, these are being released one at a time. In males, they're both being released at the same time because you want spermatogenesis to happen, but like that meiosis to continue, but you also want testosterone to be present to help mature those sperm and go through all the rest of the processes like male behavior, your libido or sexual behavior, etc., including going through puberty, which is caused by that initial drive of testosterone. Okay, so what happens in males in puberty? In females, you get differentiated in fat distributions and things. In males, you get a rise in testosterone, which leads to the enlargement of your sex organs, the dropping of the testis, and body hair. Your larynx gets bigger because that's a muscle, because all of your muscles get bigger, and so your voice drops. You have to learn how to use that voice, so that's why voices crack. And then your bones get heavier. In the presence of a lot of testosterone, you could get baldness and also aggressiveness. All right, cool. Let's talk about Preventing pregnancy now. So there's several different ways. You can have some sort of a barrier, like a condom or a diaphragm. So a condom goes over the penis shaft, a diaphragm goes over the cervix. It has to be specifically fitted to each female and then inserted before sex. Those literally just trap sperm. You take them out. In the case of the condom, you get rid of it. In the diaphragm, you clean it. You could also use a spermicide during this, which will actually kill sperm as well. You can use hormonal control, which is, if we think about it, these are usually very high levels of progesterone, because that prevents ovulation and tricks your body into thinking you're pregnant, basically. And so if you're pregnant, you don't want to get pregnant again. On top of that, your body doesn't want you to do that, so it prevents any other kind of fertilization event. Okay, so that is birth control pills, a Depo-Provera injection, an intrauterine device. The vaginal ring is just this plastic, well, it's sort of plastic, this ring that releases hormones over time, same as a patch and an implant. Yeah, you can also go through sterilization. So in the case of sterilization, what you're doing is you either snip the vas deferens, so then any sperm that is produced just gets released into the body and reabsorbed. Same thing in a tubal ligation. You have the egg can still be released. Everything's functioning normally. It's just the egg never gets to where the sperm are happening. Egg and sperm never meet. Egg and sperm never meet. And then no fertilization event happens. So these are better than having the gonads removed, because remember, the gonads also produce steroids, so testosterone and estrogen and progesterone, which maintain behavior, structure, etc. You don't want to just take these out completely, because you get it affects so many other things. Okay, that's a lot to go over. Good luck. See you tomorrow.